64 slides to get through in 60 minutes. So as Joe said, he will be collecting the questions as we go along, and if we don't get time to answer all of them, I definitely would be okay with you guys emailing me after the fact. I have my email address on the last slide, so I'm more than happy to answer questions that way afterwards. So to start with, I titled my presentation Linked Data and Libraries, What, Why, How. This is meant to be a very, very basic introduction to linked data. I'm not a techie myself. I'm coming at this from a cataloger standpoint, so I definitely am not going to get into all the nitty-gritty details of the technology, but I mainly wanted to focus on the concepts and the theory and why this is something important for librarians to know about. And so I guess we'll go ahead and just jump right in with the what. Start with talking about what exactly is linked data. Well, to start with a somewhat official definition, meaning that it's one that I didn't come up with myself, but we're going to use the Wikipedia definition. According to Wikipedia, linked data describes a method of publishing structured data so that it can be interlinked and become more useful. It goes on to talk about it in a little bit more detail. It builds upon standard web technology. We're using things that we're pretty familiar with already from just our normal World Wide Web. Hypertext Transfer Protocol, HTTP, you're probably familiar with seeing that at the beginning of a lot of your website addresses. URIs, which stands for Uniform Resource Identifiers. URLs, which you're familiar with as website addresses as well, those are a type of URIs, so we're using things like that you're already familiar with. And it allows information to be shared in a way that not only can be read by human readers, but also can be read automatically by computers. The information is encoded in a way so that computers can kind of understand the meaning and the relationships between pieces of information, and so this enables data from different sources to be connected and queried. So you can see where the idea of linked data comes in. All these pieces of information are linked together in a way that's meaningful to computers. To kind of expand upon that, I realize that a succinct definition from Wikipedia may not be the best. If you had a perfect understanding from that, then I wouldn't need to talk for the rest of the hour, obviously. So kind of a shorthand catchphrase kind of way of thinking about it that I've found pretty useful as I have learned about this topic is that we're moving from a web of documents to a web of data. Right now, the World Wide Web kind of can be thought of like this. For the most part, web pages link to each other. We definitely have links. You might say, well, what's different about linked data? We have hypertext links on the internet and the World Wide Web right now. We do. Basically, you can think of web pages as these monolithic resources that are linked to each other, but you can't really link to particular pieces of information within the resource, and the links don't really say a whole lot about why these two things are linked together. Pretty much anybody can, link from one web page to another without really necessarily them being that extremely related, and the computers don't know anything about what the relationships are. With linked data, on the other hand, instead of just these resources that are kind of, like I said, monolithic thing out there on the web, the pieces of data, the individual pieces of data within the resources can be kind of broken down into smaller pieces, and they can be encoded in such a way that computers recognize these individual pieces of data, and then the links can be made between the pieces of data rather than just the web pages as a whole. So that's kind of the overall conceptual reasoning behind linked data. The other thing to know is that in linked data, relationships are key. And I will come back and revisit this several times because I think that's really an important part of how it relates to libraries. But the relationships between pieces of information are key, and the fact that they are encoded in a way that computers can understand them is key as well. To kind of build on that, right now, HTML, hypertext markup language, the language that web pages are written in, they have tags. Those things in the angle brackets are tags, and pieces of information are contained in the tags, but the tags don't tell a whole lot to the computer about what information is inside of them. This is a very, very simple example of an HTML page. This is a heading and this is a paragraph. And those tags that say H1 and P, basically all they tell the computer is that the heading should be in a little bit larger font and it should be bold compared to the paragraph. It doesn't tell the computer anything at all about what type of information is actually in the heading or in the paragraph. Here's another example. The heading is my favorite trees. The examples are like oak trees, and I also like maple trees. The computer doesn't know any difference between the oak tree paragraph and the maple tree paragraph. All it sees is it's a paragraph, which should be slightly smaller font and not in bold when you compare it to the heading. On the other hand, here is an example of RDF, which stands for Resource Description Framework. It is a model that linked data is based on, and this is encoded in XML, Extensible Markup Language. Again, I told you this is not going to be an extremely techy presentation. Don't worry, this is about as much RDF as you're going to have to look at. But I just basically wanted to show you that, unlike that HTML code that you saw on the last slide, this one contains an awful lot of information about what type of information we are containing here. That first line, the RDF description tag, is telling you the resource that we're describing, which in this case is a particular CD. And then the other lines, you can tell that the computer knows that Bob Dylan is the artist because artist is contained in that tag. It knows that the country it was produced in is USA. Columbia is the name of a company. 1985 was the year it was produced, and so on and so forth. So that's what I mean when I say encoded meaning. Now the other thing in that last slide, let me go back really quick, all the information was supplied. We went ahead and typed it in, and then enclosed it in those tags that told the computer what type of information that is there. It was all supplied by one person creating a description for a resource. But the real power of RDF and linked data is when you bring in pieces of data that are created by various people, and you kind of don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can bring in information that's already out there on the web existing as a URI. I mentioned that before, a Uniform Resource Identifier. Basically, that's just a place on the web that contains information about one particular concept or person or resource. And so in this case, you'll see that we're again describing one resource at the top. In this case, it's a book. And we're bringing in a review, an editorial review from one source. We're bringing in the name of the creator from a different source. We're still supplying some information, like paperback. The identifier is an ISBN, which comes from another resource. And so we're bringing in a lot of information and linking it together. Again, links is a really important part of linked data, hence the name. So just to kind of recap what I covered here, linked data consists of data instead of documents being linked together. Relationships are key. It has encoded meaning right there in the computer encoding, and there are links between entities. So what? What does this all mean to you? Well, I guess we're getting into the kind of the why of linked data. To explain it succinctly, linked data basically makes the web into a database. Here's a short explanation of what I mean by that. This comes from a really great resource called How to Publish Linked Data on the Web, which is available freely online. The URL is there. While I'm talking about URLs for a second, I just wanted to mention that every single link that I'm throwing out at you here, I've collected on my delicious.com account, and I will have a link to that page on my very last slide, and so you can just wait and copy down that URL instead of killing yourself trying to copy down everything I'm throwing out at you as we go along. But anyway, how to publish linked data on the web is a pretty good introduction to some of the technology behind this, and I also pulled out this particular section of it because I think it does a really good job of explaining what is different about linked data versus the World Wide Web that we are familiar with now. And their quote was that just as you can kind of navigate the traditional web by following hypertext links, the web of data can be crawled by following the RDF links, the Resource Description Framework links. And it basically can provide much more sophisticated query capabilities. And the query results themselves are structured data, and they can be immediately processed, and it just kind of enables bringing web resources together in a whole new way and allowing people to search the information much more efficiently. So why should librarians care about linked data? Hopefully I have not made you look like the man in this slide, but in case I have, hopefully I can bring it home to you a little bit more about why this is something that is important for librarians to know about. The short answer is that I can answer in one word, BibFrame. And if you are not a cataloger, you may not have heard of this. Even if you are a cataloger, you may not have heard of this. But to sum up, BibFrame is the Library of Congress's recognition that the current encoding standard for library catalogs, the MARC standard, machine readable cataloging, which has been working for us since the 1960s and was ahead of its time at the beginning, is no longer really cutting edge when it comes to information technology. There was a statement from the Library of Congress a couple of years ago now, I guess. They said that MARC is based on 40-year-old techniques for data management and is out of step with programming styles of today. In other words, the World Wide Web and the computer science community have moved on, and something that was really, really remarkable when it was invented in the 60s is no longer really that remarkable. Something new is now needed, said the Library of Congress. And so they are proposing a new bibliographic framework project, and they will be focused on linked data principles and mechanisms. So instead of encoding our information in MARC, we are going to be using a linked data model for our cataloging data, our bibliographic data from libraries. And so they called it the Bibliographic Framework Project, and the abbreviation for that is BibFrame. So if you've heard anything about BibFrame being bandied about, that is what they're talking about, the replacement for MARC. I do not expect it will be available extremely soon. I mean, the Library of Congress just this month, I believe, is starting a pilot project in which their own catalogers are going to start working with it. There are a couple websites there I've listed where you can go for more information, bibframe.org or loc.gov/bibframe. And I will be coming back and giving another webinar for Rails next month, focusing exclusively on BibFrame, so I'm just kind of touching on it here, but it's kind of the short answer as to why librarians should care about linked data, because linked data is proposed to be, anyway, the new solution for our bibliographic data and what is going to replace the MARC 21 encoding standard. But to get beyond that, that was kind of the pat answer of why we should care, is because the Library of Congress is exploring linked data. But I also wanted to kind of explain more about what linked data can do for libraries. And one example that I usually point to is a kind of a prototype pilot project that was being taken on in France. It's a partnership between the French National Library and a public library in the suburbs of Paris. And they used to have a demo site out there, and I used to have a link on this slide when I did my linked data presentations, but I have recently searched for it, and it does not seem like the prototype is any longer available. And so maybe that's a good sign, because maybe it's going to be an actual production. I don't know. But so you can't play around with this OpenCat website anymore, unfortunately. But I can explain to you the concepts behind it. It was a partnership, like I said, between the French National Library, BNF, and a public library, and they were brought together. And this slide kind of shows the different data sources. And so the interface for the public library and its own resources were supplemented through linked data technology by the information from the French National Library. So one of the test searches I used to do when the prototype was still live was I would look for Victor Hugo. And in addition to showing you what the public library had by or about Victor Hugo, they would also link out to the French National Library, where they had things like archival collections relating to Victor Hugo, or even virtual exhibits online relating to Victor Hugo. And none of this was pre-programmed ahead of time. It was except to just tell the catalog to search the National Library, but they were pulled in on the fly to create search results using linked data technologies. And if you're interested in this, again, I am really regretful that the prototype is, at least as far as I can tell, no longer available for you to play around with. But if you want to read a really good summary of it, there is a freely available article written about customized OPACs on the semantic web, and explains a lot of the technology behind it, what type of search results were given, and also I was really interested in the section covering their usability testing that they did on it, and it was interesting to see that, you know, some people really loved it. They liked having access to other resources beyond the public library, and some people were just kind of confused by it. They were, well, what are all this other stuff coming in? I just want to know what books you have by Victor Hugo on your shelf. And so it's interesting, you know, it's not all, oh boy, linked data is great, everybody loves it, but it points out some of the real world considerations you would take in when usability testing a linked data type of catalog. And so I would highly recommend that article if you want to just kind of get a taste for what this linked data stuff would look like in practice. But to go on and explain why libraries should care about linked data, one thing that I think libraries can gain from it is web visibility. I have attended a number of webinars given by a company called Zafira, who is a consulting firm who worked together with the Library of Congress on the BibFrame model. And some of the public libraries and other kind of libraries that Zafira partnered with have been working to code their bibliographic data in linked data. And they had a quote that really resonated with me as a director of the Worthington Public Library. Said, when my community searches the web for something we have, we better show up as an option. You know, we don't want, you know, probably whether we like it or not, the fact of the matter is that not a lot of people start the research at a library catalog, they go to Google. And so we want to be out there. We want our resources to be visible through Google. When I say that, I mean not just that if somebody Googles our library name, we will get our library's homepage as a result, but if they were to search for the name of a resource without even knowing where they might find it, if it's available through the library, wouldn't it be cool if that came up in search results? Here's an example of a resource from the Denver Public Library. They have been partnering with Zafira to work on getting their collections data encoded in a linked data format. And the example that they always give in the Zafira presentations is if you Google Molly Brown papers and nothing else about location or about where you want to find it, the first result you will get is from Denver Public Library, which is an actual permalink to one specific item in their collection, the archival Molly Brown papers that they have. It's not, you know, a link to the library's homepage. It's actually getting you right into their catalog because it is exposed in a linked data format. And so that's the type of thing that I think that linked data can bring to our libraries. It can promote web visibility because of the way it's encoded and how it interacts with other resources like search engines out there on the web. Okay, so that was kind of the what is linked data and the why should libraries care about it. Let's move on to the how does linked data happen. There basically are 4 linked data principles. Yes, it's obviously much more complicated than this, but for a beginner, a start, I think this is a really good place to start with. I don't think I said it this so far, but the whole concepts of linked data were initially laid out by Tim Berners-Lee, who is considered to be the founder of the World Wide Web in general. So it's kind of, this was, some people say that linked data and the semantic web was really his dream all along, and he was constrained by technology back when the World Wide Web first came to be. But anyway, his 4 linked data principles are use URIs as name for things, and when I say that, remember, URI stands for Uniform Resource Identifier. The easiest way to think of it is probably as a URL, a Uniform Resource Locator, you know, what you're used to seeing when you type in a website's address, and that's what tells the computer to go to that particular website. We're going to use those as names for things. Everything in linked data is represented by a URI. So you can think of having a web address for a person's name or a particular resource or a particular topic. The next principle is to use Hypertext Transfer Protocol, HTTP URIs, so people can look up these names. And that just simply means that these URIs will have an address that starts with HTTP, and people can go to that address and look up information about it before they decide if they're going to use it in their linked data. The next principle is when someone looks up a URI, provide useful information using the standards. So when someone goes to a URI, there will be information there, both that can be read by humans and that can be read by computers, in a standard such as RDF, Resource Description Framework, which I have referred to before. And then what really makes linked data linked is that ideally you should include links to other URIs so that people can discover more things that come from other resources, other people, other providers of linked data. The point of linked data is not to be insular, but to integrate with other resources out there on the web. So again, just to go into a little bit more detail about what URIs are, it stands for Uniform Resource Identifier, and they should be unique identifiers. When you're looking at examples of linked data URIs, you'll see they look a lot like web addresses. Most of them will have some kind of domain. In order to make them unique, they will have, a unique domain such as example.com in here, or maybe your library's website or something, or Library of Congress.gov, LOC.gov, or something like that. And then they will have some kind of unique identifier that refers to just that one concept or person that's being represented. So the thing one in this example is the unique identifier. And multiple organizations can use that same identifier, but it will be made more unique by the combination of the domain plus the identifier itself. Again, to go in a little bit more detail about something I've been referring to all along, RDF, Resource Description Framework. It is a conceptual model that describes relationships based on triples, or you might have heard them called statements. They're called triples because there are three parts, subject and object, kind of like and you can find more information about this out at the World Wide Web Consortium, w3.org/RDF. And this is basically what the triples look like. They have, like I said, three parts: subject, predicate, and object. The subject and the object are kind of the entities that you're linking together, and the predicate is the relationship between them, basically. So if A Christmas Carol is the resource you're describing, and you want to describe how it's related to Charles Dickens, another entity, has author is the relationship between them, and that is all encoded in a way that a relationship, that has author relationship, is encoded in a way that the computer can understand. And so if you're looking for any resources that have the author Charles Dickens, the computer will be able to pull up A Christmas Carol among anything else that has the has-author relationship with Charles Dickens as the object. If you've done any reading about linked data, you may have come across the term graph. And when you start to kind of expand these relationships, so it's not just one triple statement, but there are a lot of triples together describing kind of a network of things, it's called an RDF graph. And so this Christmas Carol has the author Charles Dickens, and it has the publisher Penguin. This is a very, very rudimentary graph to explain how RDF works. But like I've been saying all along, really the power of RDF and linked data is not just to lay out these statements of how things are related, but to represent these entities with URIs so that all this information out there on the web can be brought together. So in this case, even if you were supplying the URIs for the book Christmas Carol and the publisher Penguin, you could bring in the authorized Library of Congress form of Charles Dickens's name, which is found at that URI on the far left, the id.loc.gov. The other ones, obviously, I made up with the example.org URIs, but the Library of Congress has made all of their authority headings available as linked data, and so that id.loc.gov URI that I have there for Charles Dickens's name is bringing in a URI from another source, which is really the power of linked data. So if we have this RDAF graph here, showing it with these bubbles and arrows and everything, that's kind of just a nice visual way of conceptualizing it. This is probably how it would look in the RDF code, or the RDF framework itself, encoded again in XML, extensible markup language. And so you would have the description, we're talking about the book, and then the two things that would be used as subjects are that it has the creator, Charles Dickens, using again that loc.gov URI, and then it has the publisher of Penguin. And so, as you can see, when we're doing this, we have the URIs that represent the things that we're talking about, but when it comes to laying out relationships between them, you use something called ontologies, which are a vocabulary of specific terms to be used to describe resources. So those relationships has author and has publisher. Let me go back to the previous slide for a second. If you can see, we're using controlled vocabularies in order to say that yes, this is a standard relationship, and other people out there on the web doing different things but similar, they're going to use these standard relationships as well. So they're going to use an ontology as a way of describing specific terms to be used to describe resources. Sound familiar? This is what librarians do. We're already really good at controlled vocabularies. Like I said, I think in a lot of ways MARC and our computer encoding is behind the times when it comes to what the World Wide Web is doing these days, but the concepts and creating unique identifiers and controlled vocabularies, this is stuff that librarians are already good at. We can contribute a lot to the linked data community. And so, I started with the 4 linked data principles, and just to kind of, give another kind of really easy thing to use as a jumping off point in your understanding of linked data. Another thing you will see out there on the web if you do any reading at all about linked data is the 5 stars of linked open data. Things that you can do to make steps towards making your data open and available and linked. The first thing you can do is make your data available on the web any way you know how. Put it up there as a web page, put it up there as a spreadsheet, whatever. The next one is make it available as structured data. So rather than just having a web page with a bunch of data out there, having it in an Excel spreadsheet would be even better. You'd get 2 stars for that, and you'd be that much closer to helping out with linked open data. 3 stars is make it available in a non-proprietary format. So instead of making it an Excel spreadsheet, maybe just use a text file or a comma separated value file. And then the next star is using open standards to identify things so people can point at your stuff. This is where it gets into actually using URIs and using the linked data standards, where you might, you have to, up until now, the other ones are pretty much things you can do without knowing a heck of a lot about the linked data technology and the things I've been talking about. But when you get to the 4 stars, this is where you really need to kind of know what you're doing, and you're making your stuff available. Basically, you're not doing anything to create links necessarily, you're just making your stuff available in a linked data friendly format so people can point at your stuff. And then the 5th star is to go the other way, link your data to other people's data to provide context. So this is kind of how linked data happens, and people are encouraged to do whatever they can. If you're interested in getting into linked data, you can make baby steps and start by just making your stuff available on the web, and then people might be coming the other direction and link to your stuff using their standards. You'll notice I wanted to point out one thing on that last slide. It said 5 stars of linked open data. You may hear a distinction made between linked data and linked open data. Technically, you can have linked data that's not open. Open is just what it sounds like, in terms of open access, no restrictions on who can use the data. ideally, I think linked data works best when it's open because people can just do whatever they want with the data and reuse it and remix it. And there is a distinction, and so you won't always hear the term linked open data used. But I just wanted to point out you will come across it, and so in case you're wondering if there was a difference between the two, there is. But I think ideally linked data works best as linked open data. So now that we've kind of gone through some of the technology involved in linked data, I just want to kind of revisit the question of why should libraries care about this? And the short answer is because it's going to mean changes to our bibliographic data. Like I said, the Library of Congress is working on BibFrame, and there are changes coming. Sort of like I was showing you the web of resources, web of document versus web of data before. In traditional cataloging, our record is one package, and our catalogs look kind of like that web of documents. We've got these monolithic things that come together in this package as a catalog record, but there's not really any way to do anything with the individual pieces of information within a record. So with linked data, a bibliographic record is made up of many pieces of data. The relationships between these pieces of data are defined. So again, we're kind of getting that RDF tripled here, and we have person is author of the title. When a human reader looks at a catalog record, we can understand the relationship between what appears in the title field and what appears in the author field, but the computer doesn't, and so linked data makes that possible. In that case, the barriers of the record can be dissolved, and the data can interact with other information on the web. It can be found more easily by search engines, like we saw in that Molly Brown paper example. You can use information from other sources to populate your catalog, so that this can go both ways, like in the OpenCat example with the information from the French National Library helping out to provide supplementary resources for the public library. So I just think that the overall concept is pretty exciting when it comes to bibliographic information. And like I said, you can make use of other data on the web too. You can bring in information from other sources, from publishers or from Amazon or from other libraries that have different resources than you. I also think that even if you don't care at all about linking with other libraries, I think it could provide really interesting search possibilities just amongst our own resources. I mean, everybody is trying to find the perfect discovery layer where you can search your catalog and your databases and everything, your digital collections all at once, and I think linked data could be really exciting for that. Again, that's kind of where you get to the point of linked open data. A lot of our databases are maybe not so open as they could be, so that might be a stumbling block when it comes to that, but I do think that's an interesting possibility. I think linked data can provide new ways of searching our catalogs. I think right now our catalogs are really, really good if people know a particular title or an author that they're looking for. But I think that linked data catalogs, with the way they break down information into very small pieces, I think that it could be really cool if there was, for example, authority records that had a lot more information than they currently do now about the authors in our catalog. Instead of coming to our catalog and knowing that you want a book by Jane Austen, a person could come to our catalog and say, I want books by female writers who lived in England in the 1800s, and they could be provided with a whole new range of ways to search that our catalogs can't really do right now. And I also think that linked data could provide new homes for librarians' skills. I don't think in any way that this is going to make libraries and catalogers and librarians go away, but I do think that if librarians are interested, they could have, their skills could be very useful for things like developing ontologies and creating a system of unique identifiers. The things I mentioned about before, that this is stuff we do already, and now the computer science community is going, hey, this is really cool. So I definitely think that we can bring a lot of expertise to the table in this world of linked data. And so at this point, you may be wondering, are there sources of library linked data out there? And the answer is yes, there is. So if you are interested at all in experimenting with linked data and linking to other things that are available, the Library of Congress has made their authority records available at id.loc.gov. And this has their subject headings, their personal name headings, I believe genre terms are there. They have unique identifiers for each of these concepts. For example, here, this page that is showing is the page for love songs in the Library of Congress subject heading. And this URI right here is the unique identifier. This is what you would include in your encoding if you're going to point to this, subject heading in something that you wanted to encode in linked data. And if you see, here's kind of scrolling down the other page from that. It points to, I mean, it's the same as searching the authority file in any other way. It points to other variants and broader terms, et cetera, and it also has the formats that are available for the computer to read. Down here you have the RDF XML, which is what we've been talking about. And so the human reader can read the information available on this page and say, yes, this is the one I'm interested in, but the computer can also read it and draw in the information and create the links behind the scenes that we've been talking about this whole time. Another resource that is library linked data is called VIAF, the Virtual International Authority File. And this is basically the same thing as the Library of Congress authority file in linked data, except it brings in authority files from a number of different national libraries in different countries. So you'll see there they have National Library of Australia, Library and Archives Canada, Sweden, France, Germany, a bunch of other catalogs. So it does the same thing, except it links them together with the terminology for the authority record in different languages. Dewey is also available. The Dewey Decimal Classification is available in linked data too. You can link to a particular series of Dewey numbers as a URI, Uniform Resource Identifier. So that's something else that is available. The RDA vocabularies, for any of you who are cataloging minded, you are probably aware that the current cataloging rules are Resource Description and Access, RDA, and they have a number of specific controlled vocabularies to be used, such as the terms used for content type, media type, and carrier type. And so RDA vocab.info has all of these terms from the controlled vocabulary listed as linked data. So for example, if you wanted to look for the terms that you can choose from to have RDA content type, and then if you go to one of them, so the spoken word, you can see that they each have their own URI that can be used in linked data projects. So those are the examples of library linked data that I'm most familiar with. A presentation on linked data wouldn't necessarily be complete without including this diagram. This is the linked open data diagram, and it just is kind of a visual representation of a number of sources of linked data out there on the web, and ones that are kind of deal with similar types of resources are grouped together. So most of the library stuff are over here. Here's the Library of Congress subject headings, here's the Dewey Decimal Classification, and so you can kind of see how things are linked together and how you could potentially bring in data from a number of sources using linked data technology. And so at this point, you may be saying, well, that's all well and good, but what exactly does linked data look like? We're learning a lot about the the technology behind it and how it works, but what's the big deal? What are we going to end up with? And I showed you some of the possibilities when I was talking before about the OpenCat project, or how the point is to have web visibility through search engines. But here are some more projects I know about that are linked data projects. One of them is nines.org. Nines is a collection of digital materials relating to 19th century scholarship. It's put together by a number of different cultural heritage organizations, and it brings together resources from a number of different sources. And the tricky thing about showing off linked data resources is that they don't really look that different from regular web pages. You just kind of have to recognize the fact that under the hood, it's searching through a lot of different resources, and it's pulling it together on the fly. This is not like curated ahead of time. These things, this example of resources, they come from two different sources, and one of them is from Project Muse, and one of them is from the Library of Congress Prints and Photographs Division. And so it looks like your average website, but it's really being drawn in from a number of sources using linked data technology. Another project that is based on linked data technology is CivilWarData150.net. It is a collaborative project to bring together digitized version of Civil War resources, so that's something else to check out. And one resource that I always like to point to in linked data discussions, even though I don't think it's necessarily built on like RDF technology, is the Open Library, openlibrary.org. And the reason I pointed that is because I think it's a good example of what our search interfaces could look like in a linked data environment. Rather than just having somebody go to our catalog and type in an author's name and simply getting back a list of their results, because it's based more on the concept of entities and the relationships between entities. If you search for Jane Austen in the Open Library, you do get a list of her results over there on the left, but you also get a biographical sketch, an author photo, a list of subjects that she wrote about, places associated with her, and it's just kind of a much more rich matrix of things to choose from. So again, like I said, I think that our catalogs were great for known item searches right now, but I think that linked data resources could really open up a new range of search possibilities, and I think Open Library is kind of a good place to go to see what type of things I'm talking about when I say things like that. Now, when I'm giving presentations, and especially ones like this where it's mostly theoretical and it's a lot of new concepts, I always do like to point to a number of resources where people can go and do their own further reading if they're interested in learning more about the topic. And so I've got a few resources that I want to point out, and then we'll see if we have time for questions. This one I already mentioned, but I wanted to mention it again. It's a really a good introduction of how to publish linked data on the web. If you're really interested in the technology behind linked data, I think this is a good article to check out. If you're interested in specifically how libraries, archives, and museums, cultural heritage institutions are using linked data, check out LODLEM, or LODLEM, either way, I'm not quite sure how they pronounce it, but it's a gathering of organizations who are interested in bringing linked data projects specifically to libraries, archives, and museums. And I believe they have meetings and summits every once in a while where people present on projects they've been working on. And so if you're having a hard time thinking about how this can apply specifically to libraries, I definitely would recommend checking this out. The ALA, American Library Association, does also have a linked data interest group, and they have had presentations at the last several midwinter and annual conferences, and their slides from that are usually available on this website in ALA Connect after the fact. So I would definitely, again, if you're interested in seeing how linked data relates to libraries, I would definitely keep an eye on the ALA linked data interest group. And again, I put these sites in there before, but I want to reiterate that BibFrame is sort of the way of the future when it comes to our catalogs and replacing MARC, and it is a linked data model, so definitely keep your eye on the loc.gov/bibframe and the bibframe.org website if you want more information about the BibFrame aspect of linked data in particular. And like I said, I will be coming back and doing another webinar for Rails next month on BibFrame, so if you're interested in more information about that, that's one place to go. So that is it. Like I said, my email address is there should you want to contact me after the fact. My slides are not up yet, but they will be up at slideshare.net/enimsicont, and all of the links that I mentioned during this presentation are available at delicious.com/enimsicont/linkdata. So those are places where you can find my resources as well. Did we question?
Okay, thank you, Emily. We're going to give you a second to take a breath after all of that information. A couple things. So you alluded to the next webinar, which is on BibFrame, and that is going to be November 11th at 2 p.m. So just like today's webinar. I will say, too, that in addition to the slides that Emily mentioned, we did record today's webinar, so if you have any colleagues that couldn't make it that you want to share it with, we'll have this up on the CE Archives page on the Rails website in about a week's time. All you need to do is log in with your L2 account to be able to view that. So if you do have any questions, we have a few minutes. Emily, the only question thus far is whether or not you know if linked data grew out of the Dublin core concepts?
That's a good question. I don't, the short answer is no, I don't for sure know. I do know that the Dublin Core metadata initiative has been very active in making their Dublin Core elements available as linked data, kind of an ontology. And so I know that their, linked data, or I should say Dublin Core is a very feasible vocabulary to use in a linked data environment, but I don't know exactly what, I think they kind of came from separate directions, but I'm not totally sure. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, very good. And looks like no other questions. Okay, one that's just coming in right now. 1 second.
Sure.
So, so one question here, Emily, are you doing anything at your own library regarding linked data that you could speak of, or is it just really, theoretical right now for you?
It is more theoretical for me at this point. I'm fairly new at this position. I just started in June, and so I was previously at the Nebraska Library Commission, which is the state library for Nebraska, and so I didn't really have a chance to get anything going there, although I was kind of interested in creating a linked data vocabulary with URIs for the various state agencies of Nebraska government, but I didn't have a chance to get going with that, and no, I do not currently have a linked data project that I'm working on here at the law library.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, we're just a few minutes short of 3 o'clock, so I think without any other questions rolling in, we will go ahead and end the webinar today. So thank you to all of you who attended. Thank you, of course, Emily, for all the content and information you gave to us today. And we look forward to hearing from you again in November to talk about BibFrame. So have a good rest of the day, everyone.
Thanks for having me.